The first thing that broke in the old Hadley house wasn't a window or a floorboard. It was the silence. Not that it became noisy. It was the opposite. The silence deepened, thickened, until it wasn't merely an absence of sound, but a presence. It had weight and texture like cold, black velvet pressed against the eardrums. That's how Leo knew they'd made a terrible mistake. It was a realization that didn't dawn suddenly, but crept in, a slow and insidious frost forming on the edges of their new life. He and Maya had bought the place for a song, a mournful, discordant song sung by a grim-faced realtor named Mr. Davison, whose suit was the color of dust and whose smile never quite reached his eyes. He used phrases like handyman's dream and unparalleled potential, with the practiced ease of a man, reciting a dirge. The foreclosure file was as thick as a Bible, its pages filled with the faded ink of financial despair. They saw the peeling paint, which curled away from the clapboards like dead skin, the sagging porch that seemed to sigh under its own weight, the way the ancient oaks surrounding the property leaned inward, their branches clutching at the roof as if trying to pull the structure back into the earth. They saw all this, and in their foolish, city-born optimism, they called it charm. They were refugees from the digital world, flush with the arrogance of remote work, salaries, and a bedrock belief that every problem, no matter how ancient or profound, could be solved with a YouTube tutorial and a determined trip to the hardware store. The first week was all sweat and sawdust, the satisfying screech of old, flower-printed, carpet being torn up to reveal oak floors scarred with a century of living. They found strange things, of course, and they documented each find with a kind of gallows humor on their renovation blog. A single child-sized leather shoe, polished and pristine, hidden inside a wall cavity as if placed there for safekeeping. A collection of rusted skeleton keys arranged in a perfect, spiraling mandala on a beam in the attic, coated in a fine gray dust. A porcelain doll's head, its painted blue eyes staring blankly from a nest of insulation in the crawl space. They laughed it off, toasted with cheap beer, and called it vintage character. But all the while, the silence was gathering, deepening from a simple lack of noise into something with intention. It was learning the shape of their voices, the rhythm of their footsteps. It started with the periphery of things, the parts of perception the brain usually dismisses. Maya, an architect used to clean lines and define spaces, would see a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, a swift, gray shift in the shadows that was gone when she turned her head. Leo, a software engineer who lived in a world of logical binaries, began to feel a persistent, cold draft that snaked around his ankles no matter how high they cranked the new, unnervingly quiet furnace. Their dog, a stoic German shepherd named Bear, refused to go into the master bedroom from day one. He would stand at the threshold, his powerful body rigid, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his chest like a distant rock slide, the fur on his back standing in a rigid ridge. Then came the whispers. Not voices, not really. It was the sound of a detuned radio, the static hiss from a dead television channel. But if you listened closely, impossibly close, with your very soul straining, you could almost discern a rhythm, a cadence that mimicked the turn of a phrase. It was a sound that seemed to absorb other sounds, leaving behind a vacuum more terrifying than any scream. It always came from the next room or the floor above, or just behind the basement door, a place you had just been or were just about to go. One evening, Leo was alone, sanding drywall mud in the living room. The sun had bled out below the horizon, and the new recessed lights they'd installed cast sharp, unforgiving pools of illumination, making the darkness in the corners seem all the more profound. The whisper static started up from the kitchen, a soft, sibilant hiss, like 1,000 insects rustling in a dry nest. He gritted his teeth, trying to ignore it, focusing on the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape of the sanding block. It was a good sound, a productive sound. Then the scraping sound changed. It developed an echo, not an echo from the empty room, but a faint, answering scrape from the kitchen, lagging a precise half-second behind his own, a perfect mocking mimicry. He stopped. The echo stopped. The whisper static stopped. The silence flooded back in, heavy and expectant, like a held breath. "Hello?" he called out, his voice small and brittle, swallowed whole by the oppressive quiet. From the kitchen, clear as a bell and laced with a terrible deliberateness, came the sound of a single, slow, drawn-out scrape. He walked to the doorway, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The kitchen was empty. The stainless steel fridge, still smeared with the protective plastic, reflected a distorted funhouse version of the room. And in that reflection, for a fraction of a second that was burned permanently into his memory, he saw a tall, thin shape standing where he was. But it wasn't his reflection. Its head was cocked at an unnatural broken angle, and the space where its face should be was a vortex of swirling gray static. He spun around, a cry caught in his throat. Nothing, just the ever-present, cold draft coiling around, his legs like an affectionate cat. That night, he told Maya. They sat in bed, the glow of their tablet, open to a cheerful article about farmhouse sinks, a stark, pathetic contrast to the dread thickening the air. "It's an old house, Leo," she said, her voice tight. "It settles. It makes noises. It's just the pipes or the wind." "This wasn't settling," he insisted, his voice trembling with a fear he couldn't suppress. "This was conversation. It was answering me." The incidents escalated, shedding their subtlety and becoming direct, unnerving confrontations. Maya woke up screaming, drenched in a cold sweat, claiming a gray man was standing in the corner of the room just watching. She described him as impossibly tall, his limbs too long, his features blurred and indistinct, as if seen through warped, frosted glass. He didn't have eyes, just deep, shadowed sockets that seemed to pull the light from the room. But she knew with a cellular certainty that he was looking at her. The room would be freezing cold on these nights, their breath pluming in the air despite the thermostat reading a steady 72 degrees. Bear started losing weight. His food sat untouched in his bowl. He spent his days whining and pacing by the front door, his body a cord of tense muscle, his eyes rolling to show the whites. One afternoon, they found him in the long hallway, backed against a wall, snapping and snarling at empty space. A long, thin scratch, beaded with fresh blood, ran down his muzzle from his eye to his jaw. There was nothing and no one there that could have done it. That night, they locked themselves in the bedroom, the dog trembling and panting between them, listening to the slow, deliberate footsteps pacing the hallway outside. Thump, drag, thump, drag. The sound of a body that did not move like a body. Desperation, that great corridor of skepticism, led them to the local historical society, a dusty, single-room building tucked behind the post office that smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and quiet defeat. The librarian, a woman named Agnes with kind eyes set in a permanently sorrowful face, grew somber and still when they mentioned the Hadley house. "The Hadleys," she said, her voice dropping to a hushed tone, as if afraid the name itself might be overheard. "They kept to themselves, always did, even before the troubles. The last of them, Elias Hadley, he was different. A taxidermist by trade, a brilliant one, by all accounts. But not of animals, mind you, or not just animals." She leaned forward, her chair creaking. He was an artist, they said, but his work was unsettling. He believed he could preserve more than just flesh. He believed he could capture a moment, a feeling, a soul. He called them his quiet compositions. With a key she kept on a chain around her neck, she unlocked a glass-fronted cabinet and pulled a brittle, leather-bound ledger from the shelf. It was Elias Hadley's personal journal. The entries started normally enough. Notes on the weather, orders for glass eyes and arsenic soap. But the script soon grew frantic, the language spiraling into a dense, paranoid theology. He wrote about the Stillness, a force he claimed lived in the very land the house was built upon, a hungry, ancient void that fed on sound, on life, on time itself. He believed he could appease it with his creations. That by trapping life at the moment of its most intense terror, he could create a perfect, silent monument that the Stillness would accept as a tribute, sparing him. The later entries described experiments with larger and more complex creatures, his notes detailing the precise angle of a frozen snarl, the glassy terror in a mounted stare. His final entry, scrawled in a shaky, desperate hand that bled through the page, was a single, stark sentence. "I have run out of small things. It is asking for a grander gesture." Elias Hadley was found dead in his workshop, surrounded by his grotesque art. The official cause was a heart attack. The coroner's report, which Agnes produced with a trembling hand, noted that the man's face was fixed in a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The house stood empty for decades after, the silence within it growing deeper, richer, and far, far hungrier, waiting for new tenants to fill its larder. Leo and Maya returned home, the journal's horrific words burning in their minds like acid. The house felt different now. It wasn't just haunted by a memory. It was occupied by a consciousness. The stillness wasn't a ghost. It was a tenant, a landlord, and they were the offering. That night, the power went out. Not a flicker, but a total, absolute death of electricity, as if someone had thrown a master switch on the entire world. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was a physical blow, a pressure that made their ears pop and their heads swim. It was so complete it felt like their own heartbeats. Their very breath were being muffled, stolen from their bodies. In the profound, suffocating blackness, the whisper static began. It wasn't coming from one place anymore. It was all around them, a soft, chittering blanket of non-sound that seemed to vibrate in their bones. Then a new sound. A slow, creaking drag from the hallway, a sound they had come to dread above all others. Thump. Drag, thump, drag. Bear, lying between them on the bed, let out a piteous, strangled whine and then fell utterly, terrifyingly silent, as if his voice had been physically snatched from his throat. A sliver of pale, sickly light appeared under the bedroom door. It wasn't lamplight or candlelight. It was the color of a dead television screen, a flickering, phosphorescent gray that seemed to drain the color from the very air. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately, the metal groaning not from rust, but from the sheer unnatural cold that seeped from it. "No," Maya breathed, the word a tiny, frozen thing in the immense quiet. The door swung inward without a sound, the hinges refusing to betray even a whisper. Standing in the hallway was the gray man. He was taller than the doorframe, his body contorted to fit, his head bent at that impossible neck-breaking angle. He was made of shifting static and solidified shadow, a human-shaped hole in reality. The dead TV light emanated from him, casting no real illumination, only painting the world in deeper shades of gray. In the swirling, formless morass of his face, the deep sockets fixed on them, and they felt a cold, yawning emptiness pierced their souls, a feeling of being utterly and irrevocably seen in a way that stripped them of all identity, reducing them to mere sensory experiences, fear, sound, life, soon to be consumed. He took a step into the room. Thump. Drag. The floorboards didn't creak under his weight, because he had none. They creaked in protest of the void he represented. The stillness pressed in, suffocating, a psychic force willing them to be quiet, to be still, to simply cease. Leo tried to scream, a primal, desperate sound, but it died in his throat, stolen before it could be born. He felt a part of himself, a memory of his 5th birthday, the taste of his favorite coffee, the sound of his own name, being pulled away, siphoned into that silent, static form. Maya, acting on an instinct deeper than terror, grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp from the nightstand and, with a guttural cry, threw it at the thing. It didn't pass through. It struck its chest with a dull, wet thud, like a stone hitting thick mud, and shattered on the floor. The gray man stopped. The static of its form intensified, buzzing with a low, angry frequency that set their teeth on edge. The whisper static in the air became a hiss of pure, undiluted malice. It was then that Leo understood. It wasn't offended by the noise. It was interested. A new sound. A complex, violent, shattering sound it hadn't tasted in a long, long time. They weren't fighting it. They were presenting it with a new course for its feast. He scrambled off the bed, his limbs feeling like water, and grabbed a heavy, wrought iron fireplace poker they'd been using as a decor piece. He swung it wildly, not at the gray man, but at the wall beside him. Crash! The silence shattered. The gray man flinched, its form rippling like a disturbed puddle. It was a recoil of pure disgust, but underneath it, a terrifying, intense, predatory focus. It was a connoisseur presented with a new, pungent cheese. "It wants the noise!" Leo yelled, and his voice, loud and raw and defiant, seemed to cause the entity physical pain. It took a step back, its head twitching in a series of rapid bird-like motions. He slammed the poker against the cast-iron radiator. A deafening clang reverberated through the house, a bell tolling for a war against silence. The gray man shuddered, its outline blurring, the static momentarily scattering like frightened flies. Maya joined in, screaming not in fear now, but in rage, pounding her fists against the drywall, kicking over a small table laden with their books. They created a cacophony of pure, desperate panic, a symphony of survival. The stillness fought back. The pressure in the room increased, a terrible, silent force pushing against their eardrums, threatening to collapse their skulls. The gray man advanced again, its hunger overcoming its distaste. It was learning. It was adapting. It was going to consume this new, vibrant symphony of terror and then claim the profound, everlasting silence that would remain. Their noise was weakening, their voices growing hoarse, their arms leaden. The gray man was almost upon them, its cold, static presence leaching the warmth from their bodies, the hope from their hearts, the very thought from their minds. Leo looked into those deep, light-sucking sockets and saw not an end, but an eternity of quiet. A final perpetual exhibit in Elias Hadley's collection of stillborn moments. In a last desperate act, a final, defiant chord in their dying symphony. He turned from the advancing horror and, with every ounce of strength he possessed, threw the poker not at the creature, but through the large bedroom window. The shattering of glass was unlike any sound that had come before. It was a high, sharp, crystalline scream that tore through the oppressive silence, a sound of violent intrusion from the outside world. It was the sound of freedom, of life, of wind and night and everything the stillness was not. The gray man let out a sound of its own, a silent, psychic shriek of pure agony that they felt not with their ears, but in the very marrow of their bones. Its form unraveled like smoke in a gale, the static dissolving into nothingness, the dead light flickering and dying like a spent ember. The crushing pressure vanished, popping their ears with the sudden return of normal atmosphere. For a long moment there was only the real, blessed sound of the night wind whistling through the broken window, carrying the distant mundane and beautiful sound of a barking dog from a farm down the road. They didn't wait for sunrise. They grabbed Bear, who was shivering but alive, his breath a warm, panting comfort against their skin, and fled the house. They didn't pack. They simply ran, their car peeling out of the gravel driveway, not a single look back cast at the dark, hulking shape of the Hadley house. It was sold again for a pittance, to a faceless speculator from out of state who didn't believe in ghosts, only in profit margins and cheap renovations. But sometimes late at night, when the world outside their city apartment is unusually quiet, when the traffic hum fades to a distant whisper and the neighbors are still, Leo will startle awake from a dream of swirling gray static. He'll lie there in the safe, familiar darkness, listening to the rhythm of Maya's breathing beside him, and he'll strain his ears. And in the fragile, fleeting spaces between the distant sirens and the rustling of the trees in the park below, he thinks he can hear it. A faint, patient, hungry silence waiting. Not just in the old house, but everywhere, in all the quiet places of the world. And he knows, with a certainty that chills him to his soul, that the old Hadley house is still there, its windows like blind eyes. And the thing inside it, the stillness, is no longer just a collector. It's a student, and it's learning to appreciate new, much quieter kinds of music.